After decades of preaching, controversy, and global influence, John MacArthur has died at the age of 86. But what happened during his final farewell will leave you stunned, from who showed up to who didn't, and the emotional tributes that brought an entire church to tears. This funeral wasn't just a ceremony, it was a reckoning. Stay with us because what unfolded inside those closed church doors is something the world was never meant to see. John MacArthur wasn't just a pastor, he was a theological force, a lightning rod for debate, and one of the most recognizable faces in modern evangelicalism. From his decades at Grace Community Church to his fearless stands on controversial doctrines, MacArthur shaped an entire generation of believers. But now, after his passing at 86, the world is watching closely, not just to remember him, but to examine what his legacy really means. In this video, we take you inside the emotional and unexpected moments from John MacArthur's funeral service, the tributes that brought grown men to tears, the shocking absences that have people asking questions, and the cryptic final message left by MacArthur himself, revealed for the first time. That's right. We've got details no mainstream outlet has reported. You won't believe what was said from the pulpit, or the eerie silence that followed certain names being mentioned. This is more than a farewell. It's a story of loyalty, legacy, and unresolved controversy. So don't go anywhere, because what happened at this tribute will reveal more than you ever expected. The sun had barely risen over Sun Valley, California, when crowds began gathering outside Grace Community Church, the same sanctuary where John MacArthur had preached for over 50 years. But on this morning, the pulpit stood empty, a symbol of a life now gone. The line stretched across the block, with people of all ages, backgrounds, and denominations quietly waiting to pay their respects to a man who had shaped their theology, their worldview, and in some cases, their lives. The funeral, held just days after the official announcement of MacArthur's passing, was a closed-door event, invite only. But that didn't stop hundreds from showing up outside, holding copies of his books, framed photographs, or handwritten letters expressing gratitude. The church's live stream was activated for global viewers, and within minutes, over 250,000 people had tuned in from countries like Brazil, South Korea, South Africa, and the UK, a testament to the global reach of his ministry. The sanctuary was adorned with white lilies and navy blue sashes, simple, reserved, exactly the way MacArthur would have wanted. At the front of the stage sat a large portrait of him in his younger preaching days, Bible in hand, eyes intense with focus. The same intensity that fueled decades of expository preaching. The service opened with a hauntingly beautiful rendition of "Great is Thy Faithfulness," performed by the church's choir, followed by a moment of silence that lasted exactly 86 seconds, 1 second for each year of MacArthur's life. What followed were speeches, not from celebrities or TV pastors, but from his family, seminary students, and a handful of close colleagues. Their words were raw, intimate, and deeply revealing. His son, Mark MacArthur, stood at the podium, barely able to contain his emotion. "He wasn't just my dad," he said, voice trembling. "He was my first pastor, my first truth teller, and the one who reminded me that obedience to Christ is more important than being liked by men." Longtime friend and co-laborer Phil Johnson offered a deeply personal eulogy, calling MacArthur a relentless truth seeker and the rare kind of leader who feared no man. But it was Phil's closing statement that struck a nerve online. He was hated, yes. He was misunderstood often, but he never watered down the gospel, even when it cost him. Multiple former students from the Master's Seminary took the stage, some now pastors themselves. One recounted how MacArthur would often arrive at the seminary's library before sunrise and read for hours before teaching a single class. Another revealed how MacArthur had anonymously paid for several students' tuition, saying nothing, ever. Yet while the tributes painted a picture of a resolute man of faith, His funeral wasn't without mystery or tension. Several expected figures were noticeably absent. High-profile names like Al Mohler, John Piper, and even Franklin Graham did not appear in person or via video tribute, an omission that lit up comment sections across live stream platforms. Was it due to scheduling conflicts, or was something deeper at play? And then came the final moment. A video message recorded by MacArthur himself just 6 months prior. It began with a stoic greeting. "If you're watching this, then the Lord has finally called me home." In the clip, he thanked his congregation, urged future pastors to remain uncompromising in truth, and, most strikingly, warned about false teachings that are already creeping into the places I once preached. His tone was calm, but his message was direct. Hold the line, never trade clarity for cultural comfort. As the video ended, the room was silent, no applause, no music, just stillness. But this wasn't the end of the story, because while the public tribute focused on MacArthur, the preacher, what happened behind closed doors afterward exposed the fragile state of his legacy. In the next section, we uncover what took place at the private family reception and the emotional fallout that followed. After the solemn ceremony ended, most of the mourners quietly exited the sanctuary. But behind the main building, tucked away in a private fellowship hall, typically used for leadership meetings, a more exclusive reception was already underway. One meant only for MacArthur's family, inner circle, and closest ministry allies. What happened in that private setting would reveal a much different side of this farewell, one filled with unspoken tension, long simmering disagreements, and emotional moments that never made it to the live stream. According to sources close to the family, the atmosphere at the reception was respectful, but undeniably strained. While hugs were exchanged and memories shared, there was a noticeable divide between certain family members and longtime ministry figures. Some sat quietly at their tables, while others avoided eye contact entirely, the kind of subtle tension that suggests old wounds never fully healed. Several attendees noticed that none of MacArthur's grandchildren spoke during the funeral, and only one, a granddaughter, gave a brief statement at the reception. She reportedly said, "He was a giant in the pulpit, but sometimes giants forget how to be gentle at home." The room fell awkwardly silent after that. In a surprising twist, former staff members from the Master's Seminary who had left the ministry in previous years were spotted at the event, some welcomed with open arms, others seemingly kept at arm's length. According to a former seminary dean, "There's been bad blood for years. Some people felt pushed out, others felt ignored, but today wasn't about those politics, until it was." That politics became undeniable when a well-known figure within MacArthur's circle attempted to deliver a closing word at the reception, a senior elder who had worked with MacArthur for over 30 years. But just moments into his brief speech, sources say one of MacArthur's adult children interrupted, saying, "Let's not rewrite history today." Tension escalated. While the situation didn't break into open argument, several insiders say the division was palpable. Generational conflict, ideological differences, and unspoken resentments all boiling under the surface of what was meant to be a moment of unity. One longtime supporter described it this way: "It was like watching a ministry dynasty silently fracture in real time. Some wanted to talk legacy, others wanted to talk control." And then came a moment no one expected. A sealed envelope was placed on a small wooden table near the reception hall's exit. On the front, "To be opened by my family." It was reportedly a handwritten letter left behind by MacArthur himself, addressed not to the church, not to his followers, but strictly to his children and grandchildren. The contents have not been made public yet. However, a close family friend who viewed the letter shared that it was a deeply personal reflection filled with both encouragement and regret. The letter, she said, apologized for moments of emotional distance, and urged the family not to let theological disagreements divide them in the future. "Love each other well," the letter reportedly ended. "That's all that will matter in the end." Some cried reading it. Others reportedly walked away. The reception ended quietly, with guests exiting in small groups. No press conferences, no bold declarations, just the weight of a legacy now passed on, and the uncertainty of what would become of the institutions he left behind. But this wasn't the only hidden chapter, because while the family processed their grief in private, the public began asking the bigger question: what happens now to the empire John MacArthur built? In the next section, we reveal the inner turmoil already brewing within his ministry leadership, and the silent battle for control that's only beginning. For over 50 years, Grace Community Church, Grace to You, and the Master's Seminary stood as the pillars of John MacArthur's influence. Three interconnected ministries that together formed one of the most powerful evangelical machines in America. But now, with the founding leader gone, the question on everyone's mind is simple yet critical. Who takes over? The problem is, there's no clear answer. Unlike many megachurch leaders who eventually name a successor or set a transition plan in place, MacArthur never publicly designated anyone as his heir. Even in his final sermons, he gave no indication that a leadership change was coming. His silence on succession, though intentional, has now left the ministries in a state of suspended uncertainty, and according to insiders, it's already fueling internal conflict. At the heart of this transition battle is Phil Johnson, MacArthur's longtime ally and executive director of Grace to You. For decades, Johnson was considered the natural spokesperson for MacArthur's theology. He edited his books, defended him online, and served as a gatekeeper of sorts to the pastor's public image. Many assumed he would carry the torch, but recent health concerns and behind-the-scenes disagreements about modernization may have derailed that path. Some sources close to Grace to You claim that Johnson has quietly stepped back from day-to-day leadership in recent months, fueling speculation that younger voices are being positioned for influence, including a few faculty members at the Master's Seminary who are said to be advocating for a rebranding of sorts. Their vision? Keeping MacArthur's biblical rigor while softening his combative tone and expanding the ministry's digital outreach to attract the next generation. But that vision isn't sitting well with the old guard. Several longtime elders at Grace Community Church, including a few who helped shape its doctrinal foundation with MacArthur himself, are said to be resisting any significant change. One reportedly told a staff member, "John's message doesn't need a makeover, it needs a megaphone." These leaders fear that diluting the hard lines MacArthur drew could unravel the very foundation they believe the church was built upon. Meanwhile, the Master's Seminary, which has trained thousands of pastors worldwide, is now the center of intense debate. Board meetings in recent months have reportedly turned heated, with disagreements over whether to diversify its curriculum, update outdated administrative policies, or even allow for faculty with slightly different doctrinal nuances to teach. Some younger professors are pushing for open discussions about issues MacArthur once declared off-limits, such as mental health in ministry, racial justice, and re-examining certain secondary doctrines. The biggest question of all, money and messaging. According to the latest nonprofit disclosures, the combined ministries take in millions annually through donations, book sales, tuition, and broadcasting partnerships. Control of these resources is now being reviewed by internal boards, and some fear that disagreements about direction could spill into public courtrooms, or worse, into full ministry splits. Legal experts who specialize in church governance are already weighing in. One advisor, speaking anonymously, said, "When a legacy leader dies without a clear succession plan, power struggles are inevitable, especially when the brand is tied so closely to one voice, like MacArthur's." And here's where it gets even more complicated. MacArthur's will reportedly includes stipulations related to how his name and teaching archives may be used after his death. While not all details have been confirmed, early reports suggest he wanted doctrinal integrity preserved and warned against cultural compromises. This has left leadership facing a moral and legal dilemma: stay locked in the past or evolve and risk being accused of betrayal. Already, online forums and blogs are buzzing with rumors. Some suggest a schism may occur, with Grace to You splitting off from the seminary. Others believe MacArthur's family, particularly his son Mark, may step forward to assert greater control, especially over brand rights and archival content. Whatever happens next, one thing is clear: the foundation is shaking. The man who once stood so firm on doctrine has left behind not just a pulpit, but a kingdom, and no clear king to inherit it. But as ministries wrestle for direction and influence, the wider evangelical community is asking a much deeper question, one that goes beyond leadership. In the next section, we explore how MacArthur's death is forcing churches and believers everywhere to confront the uncomfortable legacy of spiritual authority, power, and accountability. In the days following John MacArthur's death, tributes flooded social media, news outlets, and church bulletins across the globe. Some hailed him as a theological titan, a defender of the gospel who stood unwavering in a time of compromise. Others, particularly those who had once been part of his ministries or who felt the sting of his teachings, offered a more complicated reflection. And that tension raises a powerful and necessary question. What exactly is John MacArthur's legacy? For many, his legacy is rooted in unshakable commitment to expository preaching. Week after week, for over 5 decades, he opened the Bible and taught verse by verse, chapter by chapter, even preaching through the entire New Testament over the course of 43 years. His consistency and discipline were unmatched. In a time when churches leaned toward flashy entertainment and watered-down messages, MacArthur held the line unapologetically. His best-selling books like The Gospel According to Jesus and Ashamed of the Gospel challenged the very foundation of modern evangelicalism. He pushed back hard against seeker-sensitive models, warned about the dangers of pragmatism, and remained fiercely devoted to the sovereignty of God. To his followers, he was a modern-day prophet, a man who never caved to cultural trends, no matter how fierce the backlash. But that same unyielding nature became the very source of controversy. Critics, including former staff, ex-members, and fellow pastors, argued that MacArthur's black and white approach left little room for grace, little room for questions, and no room for dissent. His handling of topics like gender roles, mental health, and spiritual abuse drew intense scrutiny. He often dismissed alternative views as unbiblical, leaving many feeling alienated or spiritually wounded. One former member of Grace Community Church posted after his death, "He taught me the Bible, but he also taught me to fear my doubts. I'm still healing from the shame I carried for not being strong enough to meet the standards he preached." And then there are the scandals that cloud his later years. The public shaming of abuse victims who refuse to reconcile with abusers, as seen in the now infamous Eileen Gray case. The aggressive church discipline of members who questioned leadership. The defiance of public health guidelines during COVID-19. These weren't just mistakes. They became defining moments for many who walked away from his church disillusioned and heartbroken. Even his seminary has not escaped criticism. While it produced thousands of pastors with deep theological training, it also became known as an institution that rarely tolerated deviation, even on minor doctrinal issues. Stories have emerged of students being blacklisted or pushed out for voicing concerns or asking uncomfortable questions, and yet, despite all this and the division, the criticism, the controversy, MacArthur's reach only grew. His sermons remain some of the most downloaded in Christian podcast history. His books are taught in seminaries around the world, and his imprint on American Christianity is undeniable. The real question now is, what do we do with that legacy? Do we canonize him as a hero of the faith, ignoring the pain he may have caused? Or do we tear down his influence entirely, erasing decades of sincere ministry because of the scandals? Or do we hold both truths together, honoring the work he did while acknowledging the deep flaws in how it was sometimes carried out? Many believe that's the challenge facing the next generation of pastors, especially those trained under his influence. Can they uphold biblical truth while practicing compassion? Can they lead with conviction without creating fear? Can they learn from MacArthur's strengths while correcting his blind spots? Already, online conversations are shifting from praise to introspection. On Reddit forums, YouTube panels, and podcasts, young church leaders are asking themselves, are we repeating the same errors, elevating men to sainthood without examining the full weight of their leadership? Even within the Grace Community Church community, a growing number of members are calling for more transparency, more accountability, and less gatekeeping, signs that a new chapter is coming, whether leadership is ready or not.